Rich man ties a 4-year-old girl to a post as punishment, but this horse saw it and did this. Share your thoughts on what you think will happen. Your opinion matters a lot, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel to support my work. Your help is very important. The sharp June wind swept across the dusty country road, winding through the fields near Cedarville, carrying with it the damp chill of an early summer morning in rural Ohio. Dawn was barely breaking when the low rumble of a diesel engine shattered the silence of the farmland, followed by the screech of worn-out brakes on an old pickup truck. Mark Thornton, a 52-year-old farmer, jumped down from the truck's cab with sudden, jerky movements. His small, calculating eyes scanned the empty surroundings. Though dressed plainly, his posture exuded the arrogance of a man used to giving orders without question. His calloused hands trembled slightly, not from the morning cold, but from the anger that had been boiling inside him since the night before. In the bed of the pickup, a tiny figure curled up against the cold metal. Iris, only 4 years old, had wide, almond-shaped eyes filled with terror, her messy brown hair framing a pale face streaked with dried tears. She wore nothing but a thin nightgown and cheap rubber flip-flops, clothes far too light for the near 50-degree. "Morning air! Get down!" Mark barked harshly, reaching out to grab her. Iris instinctively recoiled, but with nowhere to run in the cramped truck bed, the man seized her roughly, ignoring the quiet whimpers of pain as his fingers dug into her thin arms. An old wooden post, once used to mark property lines, stood alone by the side of the road. Mark carried Iris over, his heavy steps crushing dew-soaked grass beneath his boots. The girl tried to struggle when she realized his intentions, but her strength was no match for the cruel determination in his eyes. Methodically, Mark pulled a thick rope from his jacket pocket and began binding Iris's delicate wrists to the post. The rough rope scraped against her sensitive skin, leaving red marks that quickly began to swell. Every loop was a symbol of the cold calculation of the farmer, exacting his revenge without a hint of hesitation. "Your mother thought she could defy me," Mark muttered, tightening the knots with a voice thick with resentment. "She thought she could demand rights on my land. Now she'll learn who's in charge here." Iris didn't fully understand his words, but caught the threatening tone and the meaning behind each motion. Her lips trembled, not just from the cold, but from the growing fear shadowing her small chest. She tried to call for her mother, but her voice was little more than a broken whisper, swallowed by the strengthening wind. Mark stepped back, eyeing his handiwork with twisted satisfaction. Iris was firmly tied to the post, her tiny hands beginning to turn purple from restricted circulation. The spot he chose was strategic, far enough from the farmhouse that no one would hear her, but close enough for him to check on her from time to time. "No one will pass through here until the weekend," Mark said to himself more than to the girl. "Plenty of time for her mother to regret standing up to me." At the distant farm, a 10-year-old white horse suddenly lifted its head, nostrils flaring as if sensing something in the air. Known for his gentle nature and sharp, protective instincts, the animal grew restless in his paddock, stamping the ground and letting out soft neighs. Something primal told him an injustice was unfolding nearby. Mark returned to the truck without a backward glance, ignoring the muffled sobs escaping from Iris's throat. The diesel engine roared to life again, and soon the vehicle disappeared down the dusty road, leaving only the fading echo of its motor in the empty countryside. Iris was left alone, tied to the post like a forsaken animal, while the sun struggled behind heavy winter clouds. The once peaceful rural silence became oppressive, broken only by the wind rustling dry branches and the distant sound of a hidden creek flowing somewhere nearby. Hours passed with cruel slowness. The girl tried repeatedly to free herself, but the knots were too tight for her small, inexperienced hands. The rope cut into her skin with every movement, leaving raw wounds that burned painfully when touched by the cold wind. Her tears froze on her cheeks before reaching her chin, carving salty trails over skin already stung by cold. The white horse, miles away, grew more agitated as the day wore on, as if an invisible force was pulling him toward the country road. He began testing the strength of his fence, pushing the wooden boards with his chest and searching for weak points in the barrier. When the sun finally slipped behind distant hills, painting the sky in fiery orange hues that starkly contrasted with the silent tragedy on the road, Iris had lost feeling in her hands. Her small body shook violently, and she could no longer cry. Even her tears seemed frozen. Night approached with promises of even colder temperatures, and the girl faced alone the first hours of a nightmare that would last 3 whole days. The early morning brought frost that transformed the rural landscape into a merciless crystal scene. Iris had spent the night half-conscious, drifting between agonizing clarity and a numbed haze where pain mixed with blurred memories of her mother, Carmen. Her lips were purple and cracked, tiny ice crystals forming in the corners of her eyes. Whenever a stubborn tear escaped, she had stopped trying to break free hours earlier, realizing every movement only worsened the wounds on her wrists. Now she lay still, conserving what little energy remained. Then came the sound of hooves striking wood, echoing through the silent morning. At Mark's farm, the white horse had spent the night testing the limits of his confinement. His determined pushes against the fence grew sharper, driven by a primitive protective instinct, awakening something deep within his gentle nature. Around 5 in the morning, when a thick fog still blanketed the fields, the animal found the fence's weakest board. With one last powerful shove of his muscular chest, the wood cracked sharply, slicing through the morning air. The horse paused, briefly, as if measuring his newfound freedom, then galloped toward the country road with urgency that would surprise any onlooker. His hooves hit the frozen ground in steady, urgent beats, lifting small clouds of mist with every breath. The animal followed a path that seemed instinctively known, as if drawn by an invisible force through the barren landscape toward something his keen senses had detected. Iris was nearly unconscious when the first sounds of hooves grew louder. At first, she thought they were hallucinations caused by cold and exhaustion, but the noises became clearer and more distinct. With tremendous effort, she lifted her head, her blurred eyes making out a white figure emerging through the morning mist. The horse appeared from the fog like an apparition, his snowy coat stark against the grey dawn. His intelligent dark eyes locked immediately on the tired girl, and something in his expression shifted. The animal approached cautiously, seeming to understand the fragility of the situation. Iris tried to speak, but only a hoarse, barely audible whimper escaped. The horse stopped a few feet away, nostrils flaring as he took in the scene. For the first time in nearly 20 hours, the girl felt something beyond despair, a flicker of hope kindled in her weary eyes. The animal began to circle the post slowly, studying the ropes binding Iris. His movements were deliberate and gentle, as if knowing any sudden gesture could hurt the child further. After several minutes of careful inspection, the horse settled beside her and lowered his body, offering the warmth of his flank as a shield against the biting cold. Iris immediately noticed the difference. The heat radiating from the animal's body began to flow through her frozen blood, restoring sensation to her numb limbs. She leaned into the soft fur, and for the first time since being abandoned, her trembling began to subside. The horse remained there for hours, shifting slightly, only to adjust his position and keep the girl warm. Throughout, his eyes stayed alert, watching the road like a dedicated guardian. When Iris briefly drifted off, exhausted from struggling to stay conscious, the horse rested his head near her face, his warm breath creating a small bubble of heat. Around her, by midday, when the sun finally pierced through the cloud cover, the horse displayed another surprising behavior. He slowly moved away, letting out a soft neigh as if explaining himself, then trotted toward the sound of running water just off the road. Iris watched with wide eyes as the animal knelt by the hidden creek among the bushes. When he returned, droplets of fresh water dripped from his muzzle. The horse gently lowered his head, letting the cool drops fall onto Iris's parched lips. The fresh water was a miracle to the girl's dry throat. She managed to swallow a few precious drops before the horse repeated the process 2 more times. It was little, but enough to keep her alive and give her strength to endure a few more hours. Throughout the afternoon, the silent, profound bond between child and animal deepened. Iris began whispering disconnected words to the horse, who responded with soft nods and low neighs. It was as if they had formed their own language, born from mutual need and instinctive understanding. As the second nightfall approached, promising another cold evening, the horse resumed his protective place beside Iris. This time he lay fully down, wrapping his warmed body around the girl like a living shield against the harsh elements. Back at the farm, Mark noticed the horse's absence. Late in the afternoon, his first reaction was irritation. The animal was valuable, and its escape meant financial loss. But when his workers reported the broken fence and hoofprints leading down the country road, a troubling suspicion began to form in his mind. He decided to check on the situation the following morning. After all, how much damage could a 4-year-old child cause in just 2 days? Mark had no idea that postponing this inspection would completely change the course of the events to come. Meanwhile, on the deserted road, Iris slept through her second night, enveloped in the warmth of her unlikely guardian, unaware that by morning her life would take a dramatic turn. The third dawn brought dense fog that turned the countryside into a maze of shadows and indistinct shapes. Evelyn Sanders, 67, walked the dirt road with slow but purposeful steps, carrying a faded cloth bag filled with medicinal herbs she collected each morning. The herbalist knew every inch of the area like the wrinkles on her hands. Her grey hair was tied in a simple bun, and her modest clothes, a dark skirt and cotton blouse, reflected a life dedicated to caring for others. Evelyn had lost her husband 15 years earlier, and since then found purpose in her morning walk searching for healing plants. She was headed toward the creek, where she usually gathered mint and lemon balm, when something unusual caught her eye. Amid the fog, a white patch stood out sharply against the grey dawn. Evelyn squinted, trying to see better through the thick mist. Her steps slowed as she neared the shape. Gradually it took form, a white horse lying on the ground in an odd posture, as if guarding something. The animal lifted its head when it sensed her approach, but didn't move, only watched her with alert eyes. "That's the strangest thing," Evelyn murmured, slowing even more. In all her years in the country, she'd never seen a horse act like that. There was something almost human in the way it looked at her, as if silently asking for help. Then she heard it, a faint, weak whimper, almost imperceptible behind the horse. Evelyn's heart raced. That sound wasn't an animal's, it was a child's. "My God," whispered the herbalist, quickening her steps. The horse slowly stood, as if understanding her intent, revealing the small, motionless figure of Iris tied to the post. What Evelyn saw stole her breath for a moment. The girl was in a pitiful state. Her pale skin tinged a worrying blue, lips cracked and bloody, and her thin clothes soaked with morning dew. The ropes had cut deeply into her delicate wrists, leaving open wounds already showing signs of infection. "Child, my child," Evelyn said with a choked voice, kneeling beside Iris. Her experienced hands, accustomed to treating wounds and ailments, trembled slightly as they touched the girl's cold face. "Who did this to you?" Iris slowly opened her eyes, struggling to focus on the kind face bending over her. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. "Water, please." Without hesitation, Evelyn pulled a small bottle of water from her bag and brought it to the girl's lips. Iris drank greedily, small sips that seemed to breathe life back into her exhausted body. Meanwhile, the herbalist worked quickly to loosen the knots binding the child to the post. "These knots are way too tight," Evelyn murmured, struggling with the damp, stiff ropes. "Whoever did this is a very cruel person." Her words carried deep outrage, but she kept her voice calm so as not to frighten the girl any further. The horse stayed close throughout the process, almost as if supervising the rescue. His eyes never left Iris, and now and then he lowered his head to gently sniff the child, as if checking she was all right. When Evelyn finally freed Iris, she noticed the girl could barely move her arms. Blood flow had been cut off for too long, leaving her limbs numb and swollen. With extreme care, Evelyn massaged the child's injured wrists, whispering comforting words. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Evelyn asked, wrapping Iris in her own shawl to warm her. Iris," the girl managed to say, her voice still weak but a little clearer after drinking the water. "Iris, such a beautiful name." Evelyn smiled tenderly, tears welling in her eyes at the sight of the child's condition. "And where's your mama, Iris?" The question twisted the girl's face into a pain that went beyond the physical. "Mama, the bad man," he said. "Mama won't come anymore." A cold fury ran up Evelyn's spine. Someone had deliberately abandoned this defenseless child, leaving her tied up like an animal. But her immediate concerns were practical. Iris needed urgent medical care, warmth, and proper food. "Can you walk, honey?" the herbalist asked, helping Iris to her feet slowly. The girl's legs shook violently and gave out almost instantly. 3 days of immobility and exposure had taken their toll. Evelyn held her firmly, preventing her from falling, when the horse stepped closer and stood beside them. To Evelyn's surprise, Iris reached out her hand to the animal, who lowered his head to let her touch him. It was clear a special bond had formed between them over those terrible days. "He took care of you, didn't he?" Evelyn said, watching their interaction. Iris nodded weakly, resting her face against the horse's soft coat. The herbalist made a decision that would change all their lives. "You're coming with me, Iris. I'll take care of you until we find your family." She looked at the horse, who watched her as if understanding every word. "And it seems our friend here is part of this story, too." Evelyn carried Iris in her arms, surprised at how light the girl was, a weight that revealed the extent of her malnutrition. The horse naturally followed, staying close as if accepting his new responsibility. As they walked down the road toward Evelyn's humble cabin, the herbalist had no idea that her choice to take in this child would place her directly in Mark Thornton's path, nor that the coming months would be marked by challenges testing her faith, courage, and determination to protect the girl fate had put in her care. Evelyn's cabin was small and simple, but radiated the warmth of a true home. Its mud and straw walls had withstood decades of rain and wind, and the modest interior was always clean and orderly. A wood-burning stove occupied one corner of the kitchen, beside shelves filled with jars of medicinal herbs and homemade remedies. She carefully laid Iris on her own bed, covering the girl with thick blankets saved for the coldest winter days. The child was in shock, drifting between moments of awareness and deep drowsiness. Her wrist wounds needed immediate attention, and her body temperature was still dangerously low. "First, we'll get you warmed up, sweetheart," Evelyn murmured, lighting the stove and setting a pot of water to boil. The horse had positioned himself naturally in the small backyard near the bedroom window where Iris rested, as if wanting to stay within sight of the girl. Over the next several hours, Evelyn worked tirelessly. She brewed chamomile and fennel, teas to calm Iris's shaken nervous system, applied warm compresses to the wrist injuries, and gently massaged the numb limbs to restore circulation. Iris managed a few sips of warm broth, but her throat was still too sore for solid food. Her large eyes followed every movement Evelyn made, mixing gratitude with fear, as if afraid the kindness might vanish at any moment. It was late afternoon when trouble began. Mark had spent the day in a business meeting in town, negotiating cattle sales with buyers from other regions. Upon returning to the farm and learning the white horse was still missing, his irritation turned to suspicion. He ordered 2 workers to search the rural area with him. It wasn't long before they found the animal's tracks leading straight to the road where Iris had been abandoned. The lone post stood there, but the cut ropes on the ground told a story Mark hadn't expected. Someone had freed the girl. "Someone's been here," said January, one of the oldest workers, pointing to human footprints mixed with the horses. "Tracks, and judging by the size, looks like a woman." Mark's face tightened with controlled rage. His plan had failed, and now there were witnesses to his cruelty. Worse, someone in the community knew what he'd done. This was a risk he couldn't ignore. On the way back to the farm, Mark began scheming. He knew all too well the gossiping nature of rural Cedarville. News spread quickly among neighbors, especially when children or unusual events were involved. He had to control the narrative before the truth got out. The next morning, Mark launched his misinformation campaign. He visited Oswald's store, the informal gathering spot where locals bought supplies and exchanged news. The modest establishment, with shelves stacked full of basics and sacks of grain piled on the floor, buzzed with conversation. "A very sad thing happened," Mark began, wearing a mask of fake concern. "I found out one of my employees abandoned her daughter on the road. The woman just disappeared overnight, leaving the child behind." Oswald, a middle-aged man with a grey mustache, stopped organizing the shelves to listen. "Abandoned her. Own daughter, that's terrible, Mark. And the girl?" "Oh, little Iris," Mark said, feigning sorrow. "Her mother, Carmen, was always a bit unstable. Drank too much, you know. And the girl, poor thing, has some mental issues. Doesn't talk right, doesn't understand things like other kids." The lies slipped easily from his rehearsed mouth. Mark had spent all night crafting this version, anticipating questions. "What a complicated situation," commented Aparecida, a customer who had stopped to listen. "And where is the girl now?" "Well, looks like someone found her and is taking care of her," Mark answered, pretending relief. "Don't know who, but I hope they're prepared to handle the child's difficulties." He paused dramatically before continuing. "The problem is Iris can be dangerous when she gets upset. Her mother told me she's hurt other kids before. That's why Carmen kept her isolated all the time." The seed of fear was planted. Mark knew these words would spread like wildfire, creating an atmosphere of distrust and suspicion around the girl. In the days that followed, Mark's lies multiplied and took on a life of their own. Each person who heard the story added their own details, and soon the whole region was talking about the problem child, abandoned by an alcoholic mother. Meanwhile, in Evelyn's home, Iris fought terrible nightmares. She woke screaming through the nights, calling for her mother and trembling with fear. Evelyn spent countless nights beside her bed, holding the girl's hand and humming lullabies to soothe her. The white horse remained faithfully on watch in the yard. Whenever Iris had a nightmare, the animal would softly neigh, as if sensing her distress. Gradually, Iris began to associate the comforting sound of those neighs with safety and protection, but the girl's physical recovery was slow and painful. She still couldn't walk without support, her reflexes were impaired, and she refused to eat anything not offered directly by Evelyn. Distrust had deeply rooted itself in her young psyche. By the second week, Evelyn noticed the strange looks from neighbors. When she went to the store for supplies, conversations would abruptly stop as she approached. People who had always greeted her warmly now avoided her eyes and hurried away. The herbalist didn't understand the change until she overheard a whispered conversation between 2 women late one afternoon. "They say the girl she's raising is violent. that she's already hurt other kids. In that moment, Evelyn realized someone was spreading lies about Iris, and she suspected exactly who was responsible. July and August passed like a dense fog of slow recovery and growing isolation. Iris had gained some weight under Evelyn's devoted care, but still showed clear signs of trauma. Her nightmares lessened gradually, but she continued to refuse to talk about what had happened during those 3 days on the road. The girl developed an almost total dependence on Evelyn and the white horse, who had been lovingly nicknamed Mist, because of the way he had appeared through the morning fog at the rescue. Iris only felt safe when she could see both, and any attempt to separate her from either, even briefly, triggered panic attacks that left her inconsolable for hours. Mark's lies had taken deep root in the community. The distorted version of events spread so widely that even people who didn't know the farmer personally repeated stories about the dangerous girl and her irresponsible mother. Evelyn felt the weight of social isolation growing heavier every day. It was on a stifling September afternoon that dark clouds began gathering on the horizon. The air was thick with electricity, and mist showed signs of restlessness, pawing the ground and softly neighing. Iris, who had developed a special bond with the animal's moods, seemed agitated as well. "It's going to storm hard today," Evelyn murmured, watching the sky darken rapidly. She knew the signs well. Hailstorms often came without warning, this time of year causing serious damage to rural properties. The storm arrived with unexpected fury. Thick raindrops soon turned into hailstones the size of marbles, hammering the roof with deafening force. Iris curled into Evelyn's arms, covering her ears as thunder boomed through the house. The hail grew rapidly in size, some stones reaching the diameter of chicken eggs, striking the windows hard enough to crack the glass. Evelyn hugged Iris tighter, whispering soothing words as she watched with growing concern the roof of her humble home begin to buckle under the weight of accumulated ice. Then came the loud crack. A main beam in the roof had broken. Seconds later, a whole section of ceiling collapsed onto the living room, bringing down a cascade of broken tiles, rotten wood, and hail. "We have to get out of here," Evelyn shouted over the roaring noise, grabbing Iris and rushing toward the door. The girl was in full panic, her screams mixing with the storm's fury. Outside, mist neighed desperately, running circles in the soaked yard. Evelyn made the only possible choice. They ran toward the small rural school about 500 meters away. The brick building was sturdier and would offer proper shelter from the storm. With Iris in her arms, battling wind and hail whipping their faces, Evelyn began the most desperate run of her life. Mist followed naturally, staying close despite the icy rain pelting his back. The horse seemed to understand the urgency and, at times, positioned himself strategically to shield Evelyn and Iris from larger hailstones falling from the sky. They arrived at the school, soaking wet and trembling. Evelyn pounded frantically on the door until Nivaldina Perez, the 45-year-old teacher who lived in the school's back quarters, came to open it. The woman, with brown hair tied in a ponytail and thick-rimmed glasses, was shocked at their condition. "Oh my God, Evelyn! Come in quickly," Nivaldina exclaimed, pulling the door wide open. "What happened?" "The roof of my house collapsed," Evelyn gasped, still holding Iris firmly. "We need shelter until the storm passes." Nivaldina led them inside, offering dry towels and spare clothes. It was then that she had her first close encounter with Iris, and what she saw deeply surprised her. Far from the violent, troubled child described in the rumors, she found a frightened little girl, far too thin for her age, with large, expressive eyes that revealed a sharp intelligence hidden beneath the obvious trauma. "What's your name, sweetheart?" Nivaldina asked softly, kneeling down to Iris's level. The girl hid behind Evelyn, but, after a few moments of gentle encouragement, whispered, "Iris." "Iris, such a beautiful name." The teacher smiled genuinely. "Did you know Iris is the name of a beautiful flower?" and it's also the colored part of our eyes. To everyone's surprise, Iris gave a small smile, the first anyone besides Evelyn had seen since the rescue. It was shy but revealed the sweet, smart child beneath layers of fear and pain. Over the next few hours, as the storm gradually eased, Nivaldina quietly observed the interactions between Iris and Evelyn. The girl clearly showed signs of emotional healing, responding appropriately to simple questions and displaying a natural curiosity about the school environment. What caught the teacher's attention most was the special bond between Iris and the white horse that stood vigil in the schoolyard. From the window, she could see the animal remain watchful, always keeping an eye on the girl, and Iris visibly calmed whenever she could see mist. "That horse is very attached to her," Nivaldina remarked to Evelyn as Iris fell asleep in one of the school desks. Exhausted from the day's trauma, they met under very special circumstances, Evelyn replied carefully, still not fully trusting the teacher with the story's details. Nivaldina noticed the herbalist's caution and didn't press, but suspicions began to form. The stories circulating about Iris simply didn't match the child she was witnessing. Something was very wrong with the rumors spreading through the community. That night, when the storm finally passed, Nivaldina made a decision that would change everything. The next morning, she would seek the truth about Iris's real story. As a teacher, she'd developed a keen instinct for spotting vulnerable children, and all her alarms were sounding about this one. What she didn't know was that her determination to uncover the truth would put all of them directly in Mark Thornton's path, and that the coming days would bring revelations shaking the entire Cedarville community. In the weeks after the storm, Iris's life took an unexpectedly positive turn. Nivaldina insisted that the girl attend the rural school, arguing that interaction with other children would benefit her recovery. Evelyn, initially hesitant because of the malicious rumors, finally agreed when she saw how Iris lit up playing in the schoolyard. The teacher carefully watched every gesture, every whispered word, every shy smile. What she saw completely contradicted the stories spreading in the community. Iris was a bright, loving, and surprisingly resilient child, showing learning abilities well above average for her age. One rainy October morning, Nivaldina made a decision that changed everything. She approached Iris while the girl was alone in the schoolyard, watching mist through the fence. "Iris, can I talk to you about your mum?" the teacher asked, sitting beside her on a wooden bench. Tears instantly filled Iris's eyes. "Mama left," she whispered, repeating words she'd heard too many times. "And who told you that, honey?" The girl hesitated a moment before pointing toward Mark's farm. "The bad man. He said Mama won't come back because I'm bad." A cold anger climbed Nivaldina's spine. The pieces of the puzzle were fitting together in a disturbing way. "Iris, can you tell me what happened before you met Evelyn?" With infinite patience and carefully chosen words, Nivaldina coaxed fragments of the truth from Iris. The girl described in remarkable detail for her age the day she was tied to the post, the terrible cold, the thirst, and how mist had come to protect her. "Can you show me where your mom used to live?" Nivaldina asked. Iris nodded and, holding the teacher's hand, led her through trails only a child raised in the area could know. They reached a small abandoned house in the back of Mark's property, hidden among fruit trees and overgrown with wild vines. The house showed clear signs of months of neglect, broken windows, a half-open door swinging in the wind, and unmistakable signs that no one had lived there for a long time. But the most important discovery came when Iris, with surprising determination, went to a loose board on the porch floor. "Mama hid papers here," the girl said, struggling to lift the plank. "She said they were important," Underneath, wrapped in plastic to protect against moisture, Nivaldina found a stack of documents that would make Mark Thornton pay for all his crimes. There were unpaid wage receipts, records of covered-up workplace accidents, lists of employees intimidated or unfairly fired, and even photos of unsanitary conditions on the farm. Carmen had meticulously documented years of labor abuses. She knew she might need this evidence someday and had taught Iris about the hiding spot in case something happened to her. But the most shocking discovery was at the bottom of the pile. Recent hospital records from a facility in Dayton bearing Carmen Sanders's name. The dates were current. She was alive and hospitalized due to an accident on the farm, the very day Iris was abandoned. Nivaldina's hands trembled as she grasped the full extent of Mark's cruelty. He hadn't just left a 4-year-old girl to likely perish on the roadside. He'd spread lies about the child's mother, who was hospitalized and probably desperate to find her daughter. The teacher acted fast. She arranged a community meeting at the school, inviting everyone personally and promising to reveal the truth about Iris. On the appointed day, nearly the entire neighborhood showed up, including Mark, who arrived with his usual arrogance, confident. He controlled the story. Nivaldina began by presenting the documents, carefully explaining how Carmen had gathered evidence of the farm's abuses. With each revelation, the murmurs of outrage grew. When she showed the medical records proving Carmen was alive and hospitalized, a deadly silence filled the room. "And now," Nivaldina's voice echoed through the hall, "I want you all to see who Iris really is." She called the girl forward. Initially shy, Iris began reciting a poem she'd learned at school, her clear, sweet voice starkly contrasting with the image of a violent, troubled child everyone had heard about. The impact was immediate. People began to realize how deeply they'd been manipulated. Mark tried to defend himself, but his explanations sounded hollow against the evidence. That's when Mist, who had remained in the schoolyard during the meeting, started acting wildly. The horse sensed Mark's presence, and his protective instincts kicked in. He neighed loudly and stamped his hooves against the fence, drawing everyone's attention. Iris ran to the window and shouted, "He's scared! The horse doesn't like the bad man." The animal's reaction was the final proof the community needed. Everyone saw how Mist calmed down around Iris and grew agitated near Mark. The special connection between the child and the animal that had saved her was undeniable. In the days that followed, the truth spread through the region as fast as the lies had months before. Mark faced not only total social isolation, but also investigations exposing the systematic abuses on his farm. The trip to reunite Iris with Carmen was organized by the community, who felt guilty for having believed the lies without question. The reunion at the hospital was a healing moment, not only for mother and daughter, but for everyone who witnessed the genuine love between them. Carmen fully recovered, and with labor settlements obtained through lawsuits against Mark, bought a small property where she, Iris, and Evelyn lived together as a united family. Mist, of course, went with them, taking his honored place as the guardian who had saved Iris's life. Mark, isolated and despised by the whole community, watched his rural empire collapse. His employees abandoned him, his businesses failed, and he spent his last days alone on his empty farm, paying the rightful price for his cruelty. Iris, now a full 5 years old, blossomed into a joyful, confident child. Her traumatic experience, though never fully forgotten, had turned into a source of strength and compassion that made her special in the eyes of all who knew her. And whenever anyone asked about her story, she smiled and pointed to Mist, saying, "He saved me when I needed him most. Now we're family forever."